Thank you so much for joining us today. We are from Oregon State University eCampus, so we work with online learning. We create online courses. So for us, lecture videos are a big deal. They're really important. So during the development process of these lecture videos, sometimes instructors ask if they can have their video on top of the lecture. So what we usually know is picture in picture, right? So on top of the slide, somewhere in the corner. And in the past, we used to discourage this because we were concerned about cognitive load. And then recently, we started questioning this practice. And so we formed a task force to look at the latest research to see, well, is that still true? Is that really true? What can we do about it? And so today we're going to share with you a bit about what we found out from the research, and then some guidelines that we are currently using, and we'll show you how we actually do it in practice. And this is our team. So Julie Jacobs, she is not here today with us, instructional designer. And then we have Jana King, lecture media coordinator, Tianhong, who is a senior instructional designer, and I'm Dana, also instructional designer. So Jana, can you tell us how all of this started?
Thanks, Donna. So the way that the ball got rolling on this shift in our lecture practices was actually with one of our engineering professors, Bryony DuPont, and she was actually flying over from the East Coast just to utilize our studios, both with the video team and our team, the lecture team, to record her lectures. And she said she wanted to be visually represented in those lectures, and could we do that? And at that point, I'd been told, no, it's not recommended. But I said, why not? Like, you really want this? And she also gave a really good reason to it, saying, hey, I want to be visually represented. Like, women are underrepresented in mechanical engineering. I want to be fully there. And I've always felt that I appreciated seeing the speaker rather than just a disembodied voice over slides. So I was like excited to try to facilitate that. So we kind of hurried up and actually, my colleague Chad over here actually helped set up the studio. Thank you, Chad. Sorry to call you out. But yeah, so we sort of scrambled, set up the studio, and here's an example of what we made at that time. There might be some latency, sorry.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to Module 10. This is Lecture 32, Prototypes and Prototyping Methods. So let's start with vacuum forming. Vacuum forming can be a DIY process. Vacuum forming is a specialized kind of thermoforming. So we've got some examples over here. We've got this Guy Fawkes mask. So this is the plastic sheet that has been kind of pressed down or pulled down over a pattern of this mask. This is my friend Zach, who built his own vacuum former and then vacuum formed an entire stormtrooper costume. So I guess the possibilities are pretty endless.
I almost do feel like I should have pulled out into the video the MP4 I have on my computer, because I can tell that that probably didn't come across as wonderfully as it does when the lip flaps are syncing up with the voice. But she brings a lot of humor and facial expression and just this warmth to the lectures that a voice alone is really not gonna convey as much. And so you can see she does a really good job of speaking conversationally as well. So that's helpful. And I do wish that we'd been able to get more than the head and shoulders, and she was also too close to the camera. So this was the early stages of us kind of like, you know, flying by the seat of our pants in a studio that traditionally was just a sound studio. It was just for audio, voiceover, and screen capture. So despite how engaging these lectures can feel, if you were able to see it synced up properly, there was still a concern about a strain on the cognitive load amongst some of the instructional design community, and with just having that slide content as well as having their face on screen. So I will hand it over to Tianhong to discuss that a little further.
Okay. So the concept, the term cognitive load was first coined by researcher John Sweller in late 1980s. And essentially it has, it talks about our working memory has a limited capacity to process the information. So, and it also identifies three types of cognitive loads. And the first one is intrinsic cognitive load, which dealt with the learning material itself. And it has largely to do with our prior knowledge, what you already know. Kind of as teachers or instructional designers, that's what we can utilize to help students maximum the intrinsic cognitive load. And the second one is extraneous cognitive load. This one dealt with information that might be causing might be not essential to the learning. So it could be the text is too much, or your image, your audio, your video that is not helping the learning, but it's extracting the learner from the learning. So that's why it's called extraneous cognitive load. And the last one is germane cognitive load. The word germane means important and relevant. So what it means is like in processing new information into long-term memory, we need this germane cognitive processing to happen so that the new information becomes stored into our long-term memory. What we heard most related to this term is cognitive overload. And how does that happen? When all of the three combined together, doing some chemistry, when you have the combination of either 2 or 3, and then you have cognitive overload, which I think everyone has heard many, many times, and which also caused us to have the previous rule at eCampus saying, when you're producing lecture videos, you should not have the instructor image or video inside the lecture. And that's what we have been practicing for a long time. I came to OSU in 2014, and we started to looking into this 2 years ago. So like at least for the past 8 years, I was told when we are meeting with instructors, we should discourage them from having their image in the slides. Just try to avoid the cognitive overload. So you can see how some concepts could be very powerful, influential in one way or another. And now let's delve deep into Mayer's multimedia learning principle. I know it's a tech conference, so we will go briefly through this part. And actually, Mayer had 3 versions now. The very first version was when I was in graduate school, and the first version came out in 2001, and it dealt with the most essential parts like coherence, redundancy, spatial, temporal. If you remember the textbook where he talks about where you should place your text or the audio or the text size, or where you should have audio, where you shouldn't have audio, and these kind of principles that he come up with. And the second version came out in 2009, and this one dealt more with the extraneous cognitive load, like what to avoid, and also the essentials like voice, image, personalization. And I think our regulation, our rule at eCampus might be very possibly coming out of the direct inference of this second version. But then in 2021, Mayer's 3rd edition of Multimedia Learning Principle was published, in which he dealt with the topic of embodiment, and he differentiates there is high embodiment and low embodiment. So some teaching could be high embodied teaching, and some could be low embodied teaching. We'll give you examples later. And in the future, he plans to do more this field. If you delve into it, you will find there's so much controversy and so much to research on. And in the future, he's planning on researching emotion, motivation, using eye tracking, biometrics, etc. And I think it's mostly his students, past students are doing the research, and he's writing the summaries or the introductions. That's my general, like Jana and I read his newest books, and most of the authors, contributing authors, are his past students or collaborators. So we felt, when we were doing the research, we felt like this embodiment piece, principle, could really be connected to what we're trying to do in designing lecture videos. And one of the principle, one of the key idea is gestures, eye contact, and facial expression. Remember Brianni, she was smiling, and also sometimes doing drawings, like we have Lightboard where the instructors can draw, or demonstrations. It even talk about first-person approach, when the instructor is demonstrating some lab techniques, whether the students are viewing it, like the video camera is from there and they're capturing here, then it will be a third person. Or if you have your video camera on top and showing whatever is being displayed, that's a first person. There's a difference between a first person presentation versus a third person presentation. And another piece is about the social aspect. When the students are listening to the lecture, imagine you only hear the voice and then you see the slides, then sometimes you feel like it's disengaged or isolated. And that's exactly what some of the feedbacks we get from students. But imagine if you see Brianni talking and then seeing the slides, the information, it's a vivid, like as if the instructor is right in front of you. You're just having a person-to-person connection there. So that's the social aspect of learning, of high embodied presentation. And here is an example from a BA375. Since we had success with Brianni's class, Adam worked with me on his applied quantitative methods course. It is rated by students as one of the most challenging College of Business course because it dealt with high level of math and statistics skills that a business student normally do not have to deal with. So students dread this class, but they have to take it. What does the instructor, what can he do to help the students? So when we start to work on this redevelopment, we thought we were brainstorming for many different ways. And one of the ways, Jana jumped in and say, Brianni did this, we might have Adam do this. And it looked like he's talking about some, we have like a very simple slide, but Adam is vividly demonstrating things. And we felt like, oh, that might be interesting. We'll keep the student engaged. So that's what we tried for this course. And we just finished the first term offering. I haven't got data from Adam yet. We're just excited, looking forward to hear what his students say about this newly redeveloped course. Okay, next.
All right, thanks, Tianhong. So keeping all that in mind, we dove into the research and we tried to find any articles that had to do with lecture media, e-learning, and cognitive load, but we ran into a problem. A lot of it dealt with, not the specific sort of media that we were looking at. So, we found things that are about narrated PowerPoints or standard picture-in-picture, or PIP for short, where the video shows the instructor in just kind of a tiny box in the corner. or PIP with green screen, like you've seen in our samples thus far. And we also found a lot of references to light boards and other forms of on-screen presence, which actually for us is our video team handling that. And so this, of course, means that there are many gaps in the literature. And after reviewing more than 20 articles, we honed in on answering our original question, which was, do picture-in-picture lecture videos increase learners' extraneous cognitive load? So fortunately, the answer to that question was actually pretty clear. The review of recent literature shows no evidence that picture-in-picture is increasing extraneous cognitive load. And there was also great agreement amongst literature that learners tend to actually prefer those lectures with their instructor visually present. And I think for some of us, this is like, we already kind of knew that. We felt that. We experienced that. But, you know, we needed to look at the literature. So some quotes that I have here, I'll just kind of speed run these. In 2014, it was noted that while including the instructor's face in the videos did not affect information retention in this study, learners strongly preferred instruction with the face and perceived it as more educational. Learners who saw the face reported having a better lecture experience than those who chose not to see the face. Picture-in-picture may affect learners' motivation to persist. And so this is from 2014 and 2015. Now in 2021, participants seeing the instructor reported positive affective responses. Okay, so our research took us down the rabbit hole in some areas, and we discovered that there are actually just many gaps in the research, including, does PIP increase student learning? So this question actually does just need more research, more targeted research. So where do we go from here? We can start by asking ourselves, is PIP a good fit for this class? And I will hand it off to Jana to discuss that.
Okay. So where do we go from here? Really, our first recommendation is just to note that picture-in-picture is an option. So just to give the instructors the choice of doing this if they are interested in. And then if they are interested, we want to talk about, weigh some pros and cons, talk about their design, their content, and just evaluate that. And we have a few considerations that we found that might influence our decision whether we want to do picture-in-picture or not. So the first one really is how complex is the content. So sometimes you might have a slide like the one you just seen that has just minimal stuff, or maybe has a picture, right? And sometimes the slides might have a lot of text. Of course, that's usually not a great thing, but we do get that. Slides with lots of text or many graphics, and or there's something else happening. It might be dynamic. There might be a sort of demonstration, like a software demonstration or something like that. So then if it's the latter, if they are complex, then it might be better not to, but on top of that, put the instructor's image on top of that. So for that situation, it might be good to do, especially if there's digital notation, just do that. There's also this dynamic drawing principle that shows that students learn better when they see the stuff being drawn or written. Then the second one is, it's really these two kind of go together, right? So we kind of think of it as narration versus visuals ratio. So if you have a little bit of text or images and then the instructor talks a lot, then it might be, so the students do have the bandwidth to look at the instructor while they are listening to instruct, because there's not that much other stuff happening on the screen. And also, we feel that in those situations, it might actually be beneficial because it might make it a bit more engaging, maybe easier to follow because they can see the person while they are speaking and get all this body language, facial expressions and stuff like that. So we have, I think, another example here. So this is actually the same one, but with audio.
High school diploma X and child, and associate's X and child, a bachelor's, a master's, and you'll create an interaction term for every single one, every single possible combination.
So you see that here it's simple, and he spends quite a lot of time explaining. So then it doesn't really interfere. His image doesn't really interfere with the explanation. And we have another example here.
I'll throw population status and even bed status in there. All right, person core. I'm gonna just go through and throw in a bunch that I use fairly regularly. Number of children, maybe number of children under 5, family size, oldest child, youngest child.
So here we felt it was important for the students to focus on the walkthrough, and so we didn't put the instructor's image. It's the same instructor. We didn't put the image on top of it. Okay, to continue our considerations, another important one from what we discovered actually from doing this for a bit is, sometimes you have people who have a more natural speech, they have a more conversational tone, and so it actually adds to it to see them, right? And then there are other situations where it's obvious that they're just reading, and then that doesn't add so much, so then maybe that's not a good, it's just not a good fit for picture-in-picture. Of course, encouraging instructors to maybe practice a lot before, and then even if they're reading, it can sound more natural. We've also tried doing that. Here's another example. Then again, the slide has limited text. He has a conversational style, so we felt this was a good fit.
What I would like you to do a lot of times in this lecture is to hit pause and try to think about, what am I seeing? What is this? What do you think this is? What this is a Polynesian stick chart. The map on the left is sort of an abstract representation of wave and current interactions that was probably used for teaching as opposed to being a full-on map.
Okay. And finally, we have 2 more factors that may be less important. One of them, if it's a foreign language course, it may be useful for the students to see the mouth of the instructor when they speak, and also some of the body language can help. And another one is sometimes the person who develops the course may not be the same person who teaches the course. And then so in that case, maybe we don't want to feature them so prominently, so we might not use their video. And Jana is our lecture media expert. So Jana, how do we make a high quality picture-in-picture?
Thanks, Donna. All right, so I'm gonna awkwardly play a video that has my face and voice in it rather than talk, which is interesting. But first, let's look at my desktop, and if I can find this one, I do think I am just going to play it this route and see if that's better. And it might not be. Sorry about the latency.
Here are some practical slide layout considerations that we found helpful while we were working through our new picture-in-picture design process. Remember to leave space in the lower part of the slide for both captioning and the video of the instructor that you'll composite with the slides. Sometimes a slide might seem off-center or top-heavy before this element is present, so just keep that in mind. Now let's also talk briefly about design for picture-in-picture lecture with the background keyed out with the use of a green screen. With this design, you could make the video of the instructor a little larger, which would just necessitate a little bit of headroom so that objects aren't resting directly on top of the head, which could seem a little awkward. Like this. Using a green screen can create a seamless way to composite the instructor's image with slide content, but it is important to be mindful of what surrounds the pip space because of that seamlessness. On the other hand, there are fewer barriers for the eyes to move across as they go back and forth from the content to the instructor's face. Guides might serve well in the slide template as a reminder so that you can be a little more efficient and effective in preparing slides for picture-in-picture. Here's an example with the red guides indicating the space that could be left for captioning and for picture-in-picture in this case. We have 2 sound studios dedicated to lecture production for both audio and screen capture. Since our literature review, one now also facilitates picture-in-picture. We hung a gray background and installed a pop-up green screen and lighting. With all this focus on the visual, just keep in mind that quality audio is massively important.
All right, so that might have felt like some weird bonus material in there. I just wanted an excuse to do a stop motion thing, actually. No, I'm just kidding. I thought it would be fun to show you the lecture studio that we did situate for this. And so that's where everything was created.
Here are some practical slide
No, Stop. Sorry. Okay, I think we're back. We're back. We're live. That was, yeah, like I said, just my attempt to sort of show you around our lecture studio, but we're not even using that mic anymore. I'll talk about that a little bit. We've kind of doing a lot in there. So at first, we're going to look at eCampus's more high-tech approach to how do we facilitate, how do we make this machine work. In my role as lecture media coordinator, I support instructors both in our studios and then also with their record-at-home process. And I'm going to use notes today because I actually just kind of I wrote this part of the presentation specifically for this conference. So it's not a standard part of what we do. But let me move on to my next slide here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about pre-production. Aside from slide layout, which is actually just a massively important part of pre-production for lecture videos, some of my work is to give instructors information and training that they need to make good picture-in-picture lectures. So, for instance, you might need to coach the instructors, if you're doing something like this, on the limitations of the green screen, whether they're using like one of those round ones at home or a little pop-up one, or in our studio even. I mean, there's just limitations to the shot, and then also the screen. So if you don't want people looking like they're like a Greek statue that has a broken arm or a missing hand when they're gesturing, that can be awkward, right? But some people just have massive wingspans, right, too. So like, you just want to so we're trying to coach them to like do a little bit more of this, like a little bit more of the, it's kind of almost like a dinosaur. It's like a Tyrannosaurus thing, right? So maybe that's what we should say, actually, like glue your arms to the side of your body and gesture away. And then we've gotten a lot better with our framing, but I'll get into all that. I'm probably getting ahead of myself now, but signaling and embodiment are part of those, multimedia learning principles, right? And so we do want to capture the signaling, the gesturing that sometimes really can say what words can't, or like drive it home in another way, because that synchronicity is so important in multimedia learning too, right? Seeing, hearing, saying all that at the same time. The time-based medium is a beautiful thing. So yeah, we were coaching them to use tighter gesturing. Eye movement. So Donna had mentioned, script reading is not the best. I'm doing a little bit of that now. I hope it's not too upsetting for anyone. But yeah, we want to avoid obviously having the eyes moving back and forth, right? So eye movement. And aside from teleprompting, which sometimes doesn't work that well for people because the timing is a whole thing, we have a lot of instructors who just bring in a script in Word, and we just make that window narrow and short and right below the camera, and you actually don't notice much eye movement at all. And if they're good lecturers and especially if they've practiced, if they're using it more like notes, then it works pretty well. And I've done lectures like that, and you don't see the eye movement as long as it's pretty close to the camera. And the beauty of it not being a live presentation like right now, which I wish I could do, I wish I could pause myself and edit things, but is that we tell them, you have the freedom to take a break, to breathe, go to the restroom, leave the camera rolling. We will, it takes us 1 second to collapse that space. So it is that luxury of just maybe fewer ums, because you can stop and think about it for 2 minutes if you want before you move on. You can adjust your script. And that's not really an issue. So the teleprompting, it's not a live situation, right? So it's the teleprompting isn't really as necessary, but we don't want to have that script reading that goes all the way across a big screen that starts to get really obvious and silly. Next is just thinking a little bit more about the physicality, or similar to the physicality of gesturing and the limitations of the screen, is to remind them to be consistent with their position on screen. And we just have an X on the floor in our studio. And then now we've also got a podium, because we don't actually want them right up at the table, right, with the camera in their face, like you've seen in some of our samples so far. So we have them back at the right distance where the focal length is right too on our camera. And we have a little movable podium that we put in front of them so that they can have, if they want to have a keyboard, however it makes them most comfortable, if they want to have the mouse there. So yeah, and it just keeps them in one spot. Recently, I had a lecturer doing this a lot, the whole lecture, and it was, not only did I feel like I might have been getting hypnotized, because I'm of course watching it in double speed too, so I'm just oh my God. But yeah, it was really hard on making those edits, right? Because she'd be And so that's a challenge. And it's hard. Like, how are you going to tell them every last little thing sometime, because then that just becomes like cognitive overload, right? Like you're trying to train them to make the most beautiful lecture ever. And then you realize that they probably aren't going to remember a single damn thing you said because you told them about 400 things, So we have to kind of pick and choose. So if I see somebody doing that, then I might like teachable moment for next time, right? Be like, oh, like if you're able to just, maybe do a little bit more like with the, like, keeping your knees loose or whatever, but that kind of movement, it's distracting, right? And that's what we're trying to minimize. So, all right. So those were just some of the things that, we try to do in pre-production. So a little bit about production in our studios. Our purpose in our lecture studio is actually to provide more of a DIY environment. So it's different than our video team, which is way more hands-on, way more high-tech, way more like field recordings, field trips, interviews. I mean, they're all about the on-screen presence, whereas for us, it's more about screen capture without on-screen presence. So we are there as a support people, but we're not in the room with them. So they have to be able to kind of use, start, stop on their own. We encourage them not to pause, but we encourage them to record each lecture as its own piece of media, because that really helps us to stay organized too. So a little bit about our gear. I want to shout out to Matt Dubicak. He's our media support specialist who has just a ton of expertise in this area. And so he totally fed me some of what to say today. So that's why I have to credit him. So we have 2 microphones in our PIP studio. One is on an arm at the desk, and that's for when somebody isn't doing picture-in-picture. But it's a large diaphragm condenser mic, specifically a Warm Audio 87R2. And then the mic used for picture-in-picture, which we have them standing back, is on a very tall boom arm. And that one is the Sennheiser MKH8060. And that's a shotgun mic that we can also utilize for field recordings. Matt did mention that investing in that quality audio recording setup is just going to reduce work in post-production, and it's going to be less fatiguing for the students who are listening to hours upon hours of this stuff, right? So we really try to do a good job with audio for that reason. We don't want people getting headaches. They probably already have a headache, so we don't want to make it worse. Anyway. They're busy students. So and I think he's absolutely right. The audio can sometimes take a back seat in video production. Like it's sometimes people get a little too focused on what we see with our eyes. But when audio is bad, you know it, and that's a problem. So that's my plug for audio. Anyway, we also use a high resolution telephoto USB camera, and white balance has been a little bit of an issue with that one, but we just try to double check and lock it down in OBS. We're probably going to move on to a different camera. For lighting, we use 4-foot tube lights or quasars. We use 2 to get an even light of the green screen, 2 on our subject with some diffusion paper. Matt got in there and crafted with cinefoil because we had some lens flare going on at one point. So it's just been a series of troubleshooting pretty much. Of course, try not to cast any shadows on your green screen. I mean, that's kind of the most basic, but just getting a nice light on them without blinding them while they're lecturing too is important. And then we're just using a Focusrite audio interface, and we have other nifty gear for instructional media in there, but I'm not going to go over it because it's not as related to picture-in-picture. So software-wise, we've moved from using Camtasia to OBS for both screen and webcam capture in our studio. Also, back to hardware as it relates, we are incorporating a Stream Deck with program buttons for ease of use to stick with that DIY capability in there. And then we need to be mindful when we are setting up for our specific instructors, not only for what their specific needs are that day, but height comes into it a lot. We're almost reaching the limits sometimes of our green screen. So that's interesting. We're gonna have to have some unique camera angles going on or something, but we try to, leave a little bit of headroom so that they can go up on their heels potentially, but we don't want to leave too much because we really want most of that being here for the gesturing, right? So framing, and then mic placement, just making sure to get that shotgun, just out of the shot, but right there so that proximity is big, as you're hopefully not experiencing too much in our presentation today with this mic. So I have a little editing demo here, because I'm just going to move into post-production briefly. We're dealing mostly with jump cuts. And a jump cut is just a chunk of time removed from a single continuous shot without a different shot or a change of angle involved. So we've all grown more accustomed to these over time. It's increasingly common, but we do try to keep them as non-distracting as possible. So even a frame or two can really make a world of difference in the smoothness of that. And I end up zooming in and out a lot to make a better cut. So I just have the shortcuts for in and out programmed into my mouse, and using the slip tool, using N in Premiere Pro is a great way to find the smoothest spot. I know not everybody uses Premiere. Some of you are probably in Final Cut or something else, but yeah, so I'm just gonna play this brief editing demo to look at one technique, cutting on action. At first, notice the cut in the timeline, which for those of you not familiar is the ribbon at the bottom with the audio. I'm sure you all know. And yeah, and then just once you gets close to the cut, I guess, look at her. Whoops, here we go. I had some ambient music playing.
And the
Sorry.
implementation of a spending plan. So now let's just consider spending plan. So now let's just
You can see it's getting better, but it could be even better.
spending plan. So now let's just consider some more budgetary terms.
Okay, so now I think the rest of it's just silent. It's just going to go through it a few times slowly, but you can see it made a huge difference. Rather than just kind of cutting in the middle, moving on to the next thing, kind of, honoring the body on screen, right? Like honoring the person and finding a better spot. It's part of the art of cutting, right? So there's just like a natural little burst of energy, like if I'm standing there between slides or whatever, and then I go to speak, like sometimes people do this. So that's why it's an ideal moment. If you can't find that good moment, just at the slide break, it can be, it's not my go-to technique. Usually I do cut closer to the middle because usually it works, but if you can't, like if they're swaying or doing something crazy, sometimes that little burst of energy that they have right before they speak, it's cutting on action, right? And it works pretty well and makes it pretty natural. So, yes, there is an art to editing. Oh, I don't think it was my fault. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap this up and just state a few things very quickly. I guess I'll just skip over that. And I'll just say that minimizing distraction. So for instance, if somebody's like itching their nose and then they start lecturing while they're finishing that action, probably better to just leave the whole nose itching action in there, right? So there you don't have anyway. And then similar, this one's pretty important. Like if somebody is correcting themselves and you want to edit out their flub and they laugh at themselves because they're kind of like, oh, I made another mistake, and they're laughing, but maybe they're actually talking about kind of serious content. It could be I could actually change the meaning, right, of the lecture to like edit out their flub, and then all of a sudden they're laughing about this concept that's not actually funny. So you just leave in the flub because that adds some humanity, right? So slide replacement, that's something we end up having to do. People forget and they leave their mouse over a word or whatever. So there's a lot to remember. Color and audio correction is really important. A lot of our samples here, I wish I could have replaced with some of our more recent samples. We do use Adobe Enhance cautiously. So use the Adobe AI. Sometimes it feels like a go-to, but then it drops consonants and it like messes up it'll take like scrappy audio and make it sound like podcast audio, but then you're like, it doesn't know what it's doing. So be careful with Adobe Enhance at this point. We do use Isotope RX as well. So yeah, this has just been an overview of a higher tech approach, and I'm gonna pass it off to Tianhong to just discuss, other ways to go about achieving picture-in-picture.
So if you do not have access to a high-tech studio, there are multiple ways you could do it DIY at home or in your home office without going to a professional studio. For example, Zoom allows you to use the slide background as your green screen, and you can pop yourself into that. Just remember to select PowerPoint as a virtual background. It's under advanced option. Yeah, and then you should be able to do that. But do remember, test it before you do a 2-minute testing, and then find where Zoom plays your video, and then you edit your slides to make sure that where you show up doesn't cover your important content. Because I have an engineering instructor, very frustrated with this recently. And then there's another other options, like if you're recording at home, there are green screen for home. Like this one, it's a green screen over your chair. You can get that about $30 from Amazon. So it's pretty, like you can invest yourself. If you do want your background, when you pop yourself into Zoom, because it might not, it might show things you do not want to show in that video. So this will be a very handy investment for you. Okay, next, Jenna.
Okay, so the last thing to mention that sometimes maybe you might see, okay, it's just not a good fit because of the considerations or because of practical reasons. And there are other options for adding visual instructor presence. So for example, you might have the instructor video only at the beginning for a little bit, or you might have a beginning and end instead of on top of the lecture. And then lastly, keep in mind that instructor presence can be achieved in many ways in a course, and so this is by no means a requirement for a successful course. Thank you so much for being here. This is a link to, we have a blog post and also has a link to the whole literature review in case you're interested in seeing that. And we would love to hear from you. I think we have a little bit of time. No, not that much, 2 minutes, but questions, yes.
Yeah, do you feel any of this crosses over to folks that are, out in the classroom live doing lecture capture, like at my university, there's a lot of folks using either Zoom or Panopto. And we were talking earlier about, is there a benefit to them having a classroom camera on, like a handheld Zoom in the back, or just the content and audio?
I would definitely think the same. I would think the same consideration, in my opinion. And I think the same consideration. Think about the content and how complex it is and what would the viewer see.
It becomes a little bit more complex because the real estate is going to be taken up by the full shot in the room. So, I mean, if there's other ways to composite the instructor with the content in a way that's more seamless, where you're seeing both at a good, because we were keeping the instructor actually too small for a while. And research shows students spend about 50% of their time looking at the face. So they're going back and forth between the content and the face. So, I mean, having the face closer and using green screens, I think probably the better route to go. But yeah, I do think it's useful to have it on there as long as they can still see the slide content.
At eCampus, we have a rule, like we do not allow instructor to post a video of themselves teaching in the classroom. We want our eCampus online students to feel like they are special. They are, when the instructor is teaching, they are teaching directly to the online audience. It's not like they recorded the classroom and then put it online for the online student, not even talking to them. So we always want the videos specially made for our online students.
I think maybe they were talking about actual.
So that way we don't have to worry about them recording in the classroom, because they will either be doing in their office, at home, or in our studio. These are the three options we give them. We do not give them an option to record in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I think there was someone else. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you had looked into, there were a couple things that I did recently, teleprompter kind of camera. I see that where AI is also correct for eye contact, but also if you look into the whiteboard.
We do use, like the BA375, we have Adam do whiteboards. Like each week he has a whiteboard video. And each week he also has these lecture videos, which he has slides prepared and he wants to enhance and update. And he also has these software demonstration screencasting videos. We use a combination of different videos.
So with the whiteboard, you're not using picture-in-picture, is that full screen?
Well, in the whiteboard, students see the instructor. They also see the instructor draw on the board and explaining the content.
And our video team does that. So it gets a little fuzzy of like what's considered a lecture sometimes, but the way we do it is like if there's gonna be slide content, that's primarily their screen capture, then we give that to lecture team.
And the teleprompter Jana, maybe you can speak to. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we're not there. The next juncture for us is just looking at maybe upgrading our camera situation, and then we might end up doing something like that. I don't know that we would use like any of the neural filters or anything in Adobe to change the eyes, though. We probably wouldn't. I mean, yeah. I always feel like these tools are so cool, and then I try them, and then I'm like, ooh. I mean, they obviously have to be dialed in, right? But
So in your Lightboard Studio, if you limit, so it's just what I'm writing on the board, if I have a PowerPoint behind me, do I get too much of the cognitive overload at that point? But I'm actually writing, talking, and have a presentation behind me, do you limit that?
so writing on what are you talking about? A light board, or just
Yeah,
like
like a
writing on,
whiteboard.
or writing on a whiteboard in a room?
No, like on the glass.
On the glass? Yeah, no, they have videos. I mean, I'm speaking for video team now, and that's up to my mom, the multimedia team that we have, but they have whiteboard videos where they also will have like graphics come up. So they'll have a piece of something that would have been lived in a lecture in a PowerPoint, or even like animated pieces come up on the screen as well. And yeah, they're not thinking that that's too much. They're thinking that that's just helping keep the student motivated and engaged.
Actually, from some of the literature that I've seen, whiteboards are considered some of the most effective ways of teaching because you can see the instructors writing and you can see their gaze of viewer or looking at the content. That seems to be very helpful. But we can't do whiteboards for everybody. That's not an option, and so this is another way.
And I think there's a huge difference because our Lightboard recording room is maybe triple the size of the room that Jana is working with. Jana works in a tiny room. That's why he's asking the instructor to glue their hands to their body because the room is so small and the camera is there. And if the room is big enough, then they should be able to do the hand movement they want. But because the room is so small, you have this much real estate too. This is what you can use.
Yeah, thanks. Your presentation was excellent. Thank you. I've learned so much from that. What would you say is the ratio of instructors who adopt the kind of low-tech approach compared to the high-tech approach? And secondly, so the college I work at, most instructors go low-tech, and it's quite hard for us to encourage them to come into the studio and do the stuff. Our studio is not as fancy, but so any tips on how to bring them into the studio?
Well, I don't think that our studio isn't too fancy, and that you probably can, with not too many resources, set up a small room to do kind of what we're doing. And I think if you want to connect to talk about that, we could. But yeah, I like to show them samples when I'm training faculty. I like to show them of the possibilities. Not all of my colleagues do this, but I like to be like, these are some of the options. And I think sometimes that inspires them. And they're like, oh, I can do that. And we're also trying to encourage more come into the studios if you want to do that. We've had some people try to use the advanced Zoom technique at home that will try to key you out, and to not very good. Sometimes it's very bad. Where it would be way better to not have their face on screen almost, because it's just so distracting, right? Because it's not keying them well at all. So that's why we're saying if they want to do it at home. But there's so many things to think about at home. It's the lighting and the mic and how close are you to the mic. And then we can get a perfect sample from somebody. And then the next day they change their environment. They have their air conditioning running. They have fans going. They have their, and whatever. If there's an interruption, hopefully they do that part over. Or sometimes we have people just lecture right through it. And we have to try to use crazy ways to get dinging and all sorts of stuff out of their lecture. But yeah, we do really try to. I almost feel like just demonstrating, giving them a demonstration is the best way to encourage them to come in and do the high quality thing. Be like, check out how engaging this can be. So if you can get one person who's really a rock star, grab a demo of them. And then, it's harder to get the non-rock stars to, sometimes I want to be like, can we use your stuff to show people what not to do? But it's really hard to ask. No one wants to do that. No one wants to be the poster child for that. So
I should do it, Jana.
I usually we could do some. You're right. We need to do it. Anyway, we just figured something out.
But to answer your question, I think Adam was kind of brave enough to do it right after we showed him the biryani example. And There's another engineering instructor, I think they're doing some of these quick videos, but most of my instructors, they are still using the audio over slides type of recording.
Mhm.
What do you think?
No, they are, or they want to do picture in picture, but they come in with slides that are like full of content. There's no room for them. So we're working on just like that whole process of like the pre-production process is so real with that. You know, it's like, because your slides will look off center and incomplete until you composite in their image, and then they're like, oh, now it looks good. But when you're actually putting the slides together, we're so used to making it look like a finished object, right? Like putting things in the center, going all the way into that corner, and so that's tricky. Especially since I do think it looks better to have the image of the instructor green screen and a little bit bigger than just in that bottom corner, because then a lot of students are watching these on their phone and they're not getting, you know, you're not like what squint to see the face. I don't know. So
Dustin, do you have a length of time? Like, is there a certain, like, is it 8 minutes? Is it 9 minutes? Is there a certain time frame that you guys shoot for these videos?
that's a really good question. So we tell them like less than 10 minutes is ideal because the research says that, but these things can go.
Well, we aim for less under 10.
Yeah.
We ask them to do that.
We say under 10, but we know it'll be over 10. We
I
know it'll be 10.
have doubts about that. We can talk another time.
No, yeah, I mean, I say if it gets over 25 to 30, then we might talk about like, can we break these into 2 parts, just because of our demographics of who we're serving. They're busy, they're working full time with kids often, so.
Have you used Descript? Have you heard of that?
Chad.
It's so cool. It's a great tool for editing, because you're basically editing like a Word document.
Yeah.
So you can take out all the ums and.
You don't need it now though because you can do it in Premiere,
Yeah. Oh, it doesn't.
but it's janky. I don't know, I tried using it the other day and I just was like, never
The one
mind.
in,
I'm not gonna use this.
the
But
one
you
in
can.
Premiere or
Yeah.
Descript?
So if you have, Creative Suite and you updated Premiere, you can pull up the transcript in Premiere now
And do it the same way.
filler words, although it's iffy. I mean, you definitely have to be careful with it. I mean, it's like any of these, right? Like you have to kind of make sure you're not screwing up their content. But yeah, I tried it the other day and I had trouble with it. So other people probably have better results. But
Yeah, I found it really great, especially the first thing, because you're just chopping off stuff that's obviously wrong, and you can just make stuff up really quick.
no, the script is better,
Yeah.
I think, with that technology, and hopefully Adobe is getting there. But yeah, no, that's a good thought. Well, thank you all.
Thank you so much.